Here we go. This is me spinning up at about 9,000 feet. I'm rapidly approaching airspace at 9,500 feet. And right around this point, I get on bar and I try to escape this cloud. By the time I finally escaped the wispies, I was at about 9,300 feet and taking a deep breath, happy to have not blown that airspace. So just pausing this for a second, taking a look around from this perspective. Over on the left here, we have Cowichan Lake. The town of Lake Cowichan is down here. Up to the right here, we have Mount Whymper, which is the tallest mountain on southern Vancouver Island. And then just to the left of it is Mount Iredale, which is an incredible thermal trigger. One of the things to note about this day in particular is that there was convergence that was predicted to run up the length of Vancouver Island. Over here we can see the Georges Strait, and then beyond that the Sunshine Coast. And so it's a little bit hard to see in the video, but the cloud base was at two different levels as we made this transition to the northwest. Lower cloud base was off to the right here, and then there was a higher cloud base that was kind of on the line that I followed. So let's just watch this a little longer. And down below here you can see are the various clear cuts that are in this valley that is behind Lake Cowichan. One big thing I find about this area in particular is as soon as you get away from the lake over here, the wind tends to be a lot more domesticated and the thermals are a lot stronger and it's just much nicer flying. However, as you can see down here, it's the landing options are more limited and it's a long walkout if you do have to land. But this was a day that had a 10,000 foot cloud base, and at that height, everything is possible. So let's take a look at the track log itself. This is Vancouver Island, and this flight in particular was my second longest duration flight ever. It was about 5.5 hours. It wasn't the longest distance, and to be honest, I mean, I knew it was going to be a good day, but I had no idea how good it was going to be. And I started out the day wanting to fly with some other people, and so the first hour and a half of the flight was actually just me kind of surfing around above Hill 60 here, waiting for other people to launch, and eventually they launched, but by that time I had started to get low, and the day wasn't looking that great. But about an hour and a half into the flight here, which is just above Mead Creek, I happened to spot a couple of vultures that were surfing just over the terrain, and I took that thermal, and that was quite a strong thermal, about 4 or 5 meters a second, and that took me right up to base. And then from there, I was in this section where I was just quite high. I mean, I was double or triple the height of the terrain above sea level. So a few things to note here. In this back valley here, Mount Whymper is that mountain I was mentioning. Mount Iredale is right here. And Mount Service and a few other ones. And I chose not to go all the way down to Mount Heather, which is around here. Instead, I cut it short. I figured that when I was around here, I would be able to just kind of take the west. It was quite a strong west wind today. The convergence on the lake between east and west had kind of set up in the Lake Mead area around here, which is partly why I think I got some pretty smoking thermals around this area. And on the lake, there was cat's tails or cat's claws on the lake pretty much the entire day. So my strategy around this corner was that I would take some of the dynamic lift off of these peaks and use it to surf up this area that's right above the U-boat launch at Christopher Rock there. That, however, didn't work well, and I ended up getting quite low along this whole section, as you can see down here. So it was really just this section back here where I got to be in the stratosphere, and then the rest of it was quite low. Everything changed around here where I managed to get a good climb. And from there, I decided to just start exploring to the south. And then this whole last third of the flight was very buoyant. I really hardly took very many turns and really just kind of floated around in kind of this ambient lift that continued along. I then got a little bit bored and was wondering if I should just try to finish an FAI triangle, since on my flight computer it looked like if I hit this turn point down to the far south here, I could do that. So that's what I did. And then on the way back, it looked like if I headed over to closer to Hill 60 here, I'd be able to close the triangle and get an FAI. So I figured, well, shit, I'm already still so high, I may as well just do that. And at any point, from here, I could have just turned back and landed at Lake Cowichan. But from there, I thought, I'm still in lifty, buoyant air, and it seems like the east wind isn't that strong at the altitude I was at. So I decided to just continue on and eventually go into the area that we call the Forest of Green, because there's really very few landing options in this whole area. But as we'll see in the video, there's actually quite a number of landing options if you look closely. They're just not obvious until you're actually there. So let's go back to the video and give it a play, and I'll give you some descriptions of what we're doing while we're flying. So as you can see, it's just super high. I mean, 10,000 feet here. At this point, I sped up the video about 16 times, and apologies for my first time editing video. I do try to do some pans around here just so you can see what the terrain looks like. At this point, I headed a little bit more towards the east to see if those clouds were any good, but then decided that I'd rather fly the higher clouds, the higher cloud base that was kind of in this line that I'm following here. So continuing along on the right of the screen here, we see Mount Whymper. Mount Landale is directly in front at the end of this valley. And cloud base is about 10,000. Unfortunately, this area that I'm in right now is the airspace ends at 9,500 feet, so I have to keep leaving lift and just continuing on as much as I would have liked to have gotten higher. The airspace doesn't transition to 12,500 feet until after Mount Landale. And this particular climb here was quite nice. I was able to take this right back up to like 9,400 feet before I had to get out of there and avoid airspace again. And here we start to get a little bit more of a perspective also of Mount Whymper. Let's see if I can give you a better view here. Looks like I didn't pan down. Oh yeah, I did. So Mount Whymper is literally, let's see here. Mount Whymper is right here. And if you're going cross country, so the U-boat launch is down where my cursor is here, and then the Mount Holmes launch is over on the far left here. So when you get high over this ridge here, which is that ridge that's right by the lake, that's at about 3,500 feet. When you get high over that ridge, you can kind of make the leap over this valley straight to Mount Landale, but I'd recommend not doing that. My favorite way to do it is actually to follow this crest and follow this crest all the way around here, which tends to have a nice cloud street and works really well. And then from there, it's an easy jump back to Mount Whymper here. And even if you come in low there, you can see there's a cloud right above Mount Whymper there, and then another cloud over Iredale there, or sorry, Landale right there. Every time I've had to dodge into Mount Whymper, even if I was low, I hit a rocket that takes me to base. So off to the right here, we have the Four Lakes area to the west of Nanaimo. And here's a nice big queue forming right off of Mount Whymper. So I just keep following this. This is terrain I've flown a lot in the past. I think there's only been once or twice I've been up this high, and it's just always so nice when you can get up this high because you're really just flying the clouds and not the terrain. I'm just smoking along here on bar and going under all the little wispies as they're forming. By this point, the convergence that's to the east has kind of disappeared, and there isn't really clouds over there. At this point, I'm not really sure what to do with the day. I consider heading off to the right, which would be towards Mount Arrowsmith and Port Alberni and Green Mountain. Actually, that's a good point. Right here is Green Mountain, which is the big ski area that existed until the 70s. And that's a really nice XC. There's great flying back there. And then off in the distance here is Mount Arrowsmith. But the tricky part is that it was getting later in the day. You can see the sun is getting low on the horizon, and I wasn't ready to be committed to going that far deep on this particular day. So just keep following the clouds, zooming along here quite high. Unfortunately, at this point, I've gotten to the point where airspace is at about 12,500 feet. But unfortunately, I actually it's right around here. But at this point, the thermals were just not giving me kind of the oomph I needed to get up to 10 grand. So I was really having to milk them, and they were kind of petering out at about 8,000, 8,500. And as you can see here, it's pretty much blue skies, so I didn't have much to go on. So around this time, I started to head south, back towards the lake, and this is where I started to get low and start back into the 5 or 6,000 altitude range instead of around 8 or 9,000. But as you can see, it's just like gorgeous views of the lake here. And a run that I've typically done in the past is even if you get low on the north side of the lake, you can typically surf the west wind up these slopes that fall along here. But at this point, I'm still quite high, so I'm just kind of following the liftiest line I can find. One thing I am a little bit surprised though is just how weak the thermals are along this section. It feels I've got quite a tailwind at this point, and it's not obvious on the lake to the right, but the wind is quite strong on the lake this whole day. It was a very west wind. So this is a good perspective here. I'll just go back to that. So in front of us here, this is the Yuba launch. This is the ridge behind launch that I was mentioning. Back off to the left here is Mount Whymper. So this is sort of a perspective from the other side. And here's the mill site where we would land. And then in just a moment here, I kind of pan to the left and show you this is Mount Landale, this is Mount Landale back here and Mount Whymper there. So quite high mountains. But you can see from this terrain back here, there's really nowhere to land. So before you make that jump back there, you do want to be at about 5,000 feet or more. And so I'm diving into this spine here. Typically this is a huge boomer. Down to the left or the right here is the mill site. This is usually a huge boomer off of this peak, but unfortunately on this day it seemed like the thermals were just not kicking off anymore, and it was quite shredded and very turbulent, and the thermals were just not cohesive. So I putter around here for a while trying to find something, and just was really not getting anything. So I decided to just keep heading east. And at this point, I'm getting below ridge height and getting a little nervous because this valley that's in along here, it's kind of this whole area back into the left here, it's a bowl. It's the bowl that we drive through when we drive up to the Mount Holmes launch. And so at this point, I'm getting low enough where I'm like, well, I'm going to be screwed if I get low back in there. So I start heading out towards the lake, and right down here, this off the tip of my harness, that is the Mount Holmes launch. And so I make a dive towards there because I know there's some good thermal triggers, but as you can see, I really didn't get anything. So I'm still just kind of surfing in, relatively lifty air, but here I start getting quite low over the trees, and I'm kind of looking down, going, oh, I don't have any good landing options before below. I really need to make this work. So here I'm just surfing, 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 and I find a little crest where I can surf the west wind and kind of get higher. And now I'm above the ridge. So from here, it's a decent glide to kind of stay above the ridge and catch some ambient lift as I'm going along. Look at the boats on the lake there, kind of streaking along. And right around here, I'm aiming for the the ranch landing zone, where I'm thinking I'm going to end the day. And I get on the radio and I actually say, if I find another boomer, maybe I'll keep going, but otherwise I'll just be coming to land at the ranch soon. And yeah, then I caught a boomer. And this one took me up to, let's see here. That one took me up to, uh, yeah, not as high as the other ones, but it was still high enough that I could still go places. So from here, just highlight here. Uh, Back here is what we call Stinky Fish Launch, back heading towards Mount Renfrew. And on the left is what I call Mount Boomer. Uh, that actually is not its name, it's just that every time I go over there, there's boomer thermals, and this whole spine works really well. So, as you'll see in a moment, we'll be headed over towards that. Gorgeous view of the lake. It's not obvious from the video, but the lake is streaking quite a bit here with the west wind. And in the area that I'm in, there's actually almost no wind. It's this place where I'm crossing right now. I would say was the convergence between the east and west. So it was quite a good glide. Um, oh yeah, you can see that. Oh yeah, so let's go back here for a second and just look at Masachi Lake here. So Masachi Lake is the one that's just under my nose cone there. Let's watch the streaking on the lake there. So the boat's cruising around now. You see the streaking? That's the east wind there. So I'm not quite on the convergence, but I'm pretty darn close. And then this whole spine here just works so well. I mean, anytime you can get over this, I've been able to climb out here many times. The caveat to that, though, is the one time I haven't been able to climb out here was, so this is a perspective looking north, is I've come in low over this ridge here when the east wind has been quite strong coming up the valley here. And there was once where I was flushed really hard as soon as I came over the spine. But I was pretty low, kind of deserved it. I should have got much higher back here before I crossed over this ridge. So if it's later in the day and you think there's an east wind, don't go over this ridge low. But at this point, I was quite high and pretty close to where east and west were meeting. So at this point, I'm realizing that the day is quite buoyant and thinking, what am I going to do with myself? I mean, technically, this is Mount Boomer, what I call it. It's reminds me of Mount Woodrat, where it's sort of just this cone that really draws thermals from all sides. And then over here is Stinky Fish off to the right, and then this is the road that leads out to Stinky Fish. So here you can. I'm just getting nice and high and realizing that the day is still quite on despite it being getting quite late, and wondering what I'm going to do. And right around now is when I check out my flight computer and realize that if I tag a point off to the south, that if I tag a point just off to the south here, I'll be able to do a nice FAI triangle. So I figured, well, what the hell? It's still pretty lifty, but you can see how low on the horizon the sun is getting. And at this point, yeah, it's all pretty buoyant air. I'm getting zeros and -1, 0, -1. So I'm just on bar now and cruising along. And at any point, this giant field here is what we call Honeymoon Bay. I could have dove out to Honeymoon Bay if all of a sudden I found myself in a wall of sink. So I was keeping that as an option, but yeah, just kept cruising along. The air was super lifty. It's a little close in more of the terrain. But taking a look back here, right here is where here is where I'm starting to. This is where I climbed out over Mount Boomer, which I guess technically I wasn't quite over it. And I'm on this line right now, just crossing over this valley here. And as you can see over here, it's basically just that entire trip out there. I took a few turns once in a while, but for the most part, I just was not losing any altitude. And then caught a nice thermal over here, and then allowed me to really kind of punch back and tag that turn point. And I actually went further than the turn point. Originally it was a 60 kilometer FAI, and ended up extending it to 75 or so, going past the point, and then just kind of retrace my steps. But even on the way back, super buoyant. And then I get another nice climb over Boomer here before I do that glide. So just continuing on here. It's sped up, and at this point I'm just chilling. It's gorgeous. The air is really nice and smooth, and the thermals aren't particularly strong, but the air isn't going down either. So it's really just a sightseeing flight at this point. And although I've flown this area a bunch in the past, I've generally been quite a bit higher than this. So it was a neat perspective to see the terrain here and see how good it was actually working. And always keeping an eye to where's a good LZ. I mean, that's something I like to have, is at least a couple of somewhat decent LZs within glide anywhere I go. Of course, a decent LZ is relative, depending on how desperate you are, but. So cruising along here, and mostly I'm just playing this video so that, if you're considering an XC on the south side of the lake, you get a bit of a preview of what it actually looks like. Lots of clear cuts, lots of thermals kicking off. It's really nice to be away from that lake wind once you're back here. So cruising along here, continuing on, circling. So this is just before I head off to tag that far south turn point, and that climb that I was just in there wasn't very strong, but we're getting pretty late in the day, and I really just wanted to milk every little bit I could. And as you can see, the area I'm flying into is a lot of clear cuts, but really not much in the way of roads to civilization. So I really didn't want to get stuck back here. So right around here is where I turn around and start heading back to the lake, retracing my steps. And even at this point, I'm not nervous, but I'm vigilant and just flying as efficiently as I can, because I'm not that high above the terrain. The camera kind of is a little bit deceiving, but I'm really not that high above the terrain. So continuing along. And pardon my editing skills. So this spine that we see kind of just off to the right of my nose cone, that's the Boomer Mountain, the south of Missachi Lake. And I'm aiming towards that, thinking perhaps I'll land at the ranch or something. But realizing how buoyant the air is, right ahead of my nose cone in the distance is the Hill 60 ridge. So the Hill 60 launch is somewhere right about here. And since that's where I took off from, I'm thinking, well, shit, maybe I'd like to close this triangle if I can. But I also know that in this whole area here, there are no LZs below the Hill 60 launch, or no good LZs anyway. So, as much as it'd be nice to tag that, or, close that triangle, I'm also um, not wanting to risk it at the end of the day. But I get a really decent climb off of the Boomer Mountain here. And at this point, closing the circle and making it back to the ranch, which is just in the center of the screen there, seems like it's a possibility. So, yeah, I just keep milking this thermal, which at this point is kind of petered out. Unfortunately, my camera cut out for quite a bit there. So where we're at now is I'm past the Hill 60 launch heading east, which is off to my left here. And in the distance, you can see the nub of Mount Prevost. And so what's ahead of me is I'm flying right over the highway, but this is what I like to call the ocean of green. Yeah, back there behind me is Hill 60. So this is the ocean of green where there are really limited landing options. But as I discovered on this particular flight, there's actually a number of homesteads. So just pausing the video, you can see there's a homestead here, there's a homestead over there, there's a couple that are up in the distance here, and there's a triangular thing right beside the highway, which is where I ended up landing. I mean, I would have loved to make it back to Mount Prevost, but I think it was 8 o'clock at night at this point. It was getting quite late, and I was pretty confident that I was not going to get anything else as far as climbs in this area. So, yeah, this would have been a tight landing. This, I was unsure how swampy it was. It looked like it was swampy. So then the two LZs I was really hoping for is a homestead off to the right here or this triangular thing. But as I get closer and I get lower and lower and lower, and my options start to disappear, I realize I could probably make this homestead here, but really it's going to be this or this. And at this point, I'm still actually getting really good glide and praying that my glide stays to be able to make it into these spots. So at this point, I decide I'm going to go for the triangle area and get out of my harness and zip, 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 and we land. And that was the end of that flight. Hope you enjoyed it.